Hi, I'm Kalin, founder of an 8-figure startup. Today we're going to talk about a very interesting topic, chaos. Not chaos in the world as in anarchy and people running with weapons on the street and setting things on fire, but chaos in ourselves, internal chaos, and what it can do for us, the positives of chaos. Let's see how we grow in life, how we improve. We have billions of potential axes of improvement. You can learn French, or you can learn web design or SEO, or you can learn something that can help you in multiple verticals like sales or communication skills. How do we prioritize what to learn? There are so many options that it can be paralyzing and lead us to no action at all. How do we get going and actually do something that's gonna have a very high return on investment of our efforts until the end of our lives? Let's say you want to learn to speak French. You learn French, you get some narrow skill that may help you in life. But what happens in your brain? Sure, you develop your language center and some relations in your brain, but the benefits are confined to your left brain hemisphere, the one that is already well developed due to our culture and education system, while the most things you're probably lacking are in the right brain hemisphere. This is intuition, creativity, and feeling flows like value, money, and non-work related stuff like love. So what can we do to actually stimulate the skills that are really benefiting our right brain hemisphere? These skills are often called meta skills. Sales, communication, they help in every area of our growth. They help in our work, they help in our lives. So how do we develop meta skills? The short answer is chaos. But why chaos? First, we have to define two different ways of learning. You have organized learning and chaotic learning. Think how we learn stuff in school. We get the lesson, it's in the most systematized way possible. Some very smart people took all the facts and tried to develop a coherent system, including all of them, all of the facts, the principles, and we learn it. Then we do a test, we do well at the test, and after 3 months we remember very little, and after 3 years we remember nothing. Why does it work this way? Two main reasons. The first reason is that we fought only for the test, but in the end, for the test, we get some good feelings and some status, but no money, no really amazing experience. It was just a very weak incentive. So the first problem is incentive. But there is also a second problem. And the second problem is the actual way of learning, the way that our brain builds relations and connects the dots. If the dots are already connected, like they would be in a physics or chemistry textbook, if the dots are well connected, like they would be in a physics or chemistry textbook, you get the connections ready and the brain doesn't have to do the connections itself. That's not ideal because the connections that the brain discovers itself are much more long-lasting and much deeper. They form an intuition, not just a system of knowledge. So you actually would know more than you know. And this is extremely important if you want to aim high in education. So this is why it's very important get the learner to connect the dots themselves. But how do we do this? This means that we have to give two things: chaotic knowledge that has to be connected, so we can find the relations ourselves, but also time that our problem-solving, fast-paced world and education system just cannot give, because the ideal way to learn physics or chemistry would be to go into a lab and just make random experiments without anyone telling us any principles, so we can discover the principles ourselves and then we remember them for life. But this is dangerous, chaotic, and really leaves out the teacher, because really you don't need a teacher to do most of that. You just need, let's say, support in the experiments. And because the education system is designed by teachers who want to be in the center of everything, want to show how much they know after dedicating years of their life to knowledge and science. The teacher is the center of the education, not you, the student, as it should be. So this is why chaotic learning is not practiced as much as it should be. We see that in areas such as programming and other typically self-learned areas, the self-taught people are much better than the ones who went to university and did it in the systemic way. So this is a proof that actually chaotic learning is the better, practically much better approach. If you do several years of chaotic learning in a field, you will become, with enough dedication, better than most teachers in the field, because the teachers will know what they have to teach, but you will feel it. You have a deep intuitive feel. And when you have this, you can solve any problem in this field, even if it's not directly related to the problems that you have already solved. So your knowledge, in a way, becomes almost infinite. The number of problems that you can solve is almost infinite. In this context, how do meta skills work? Each meta skills is like a bridge between your personality, your identity, and the world. Let's look at sales. What does a good sales always have? It's one thing, conviction. If you have conviction, you will be very good at sales. You just have to believe in what you're selling. But this conviction doesn't come from the product, it comes from you. That's why it's like a bridge between you and what you're doing, because you can be very confident in the product specifications, but still not have the real conviction, because conviction comes from you, not the product. And each meta skill is just like that. For communication, you need authenticity. You can read all the best communication manuals, but if you don't have authenticity, you will never be a good communicator. For critical thinking, you have to love truth. You can read all the science you want, but if you don't love striving for the truth, then you won't really have real critical thinking. It's the same with all meta skills. What do all meta skills have in common? You, because they're all a bridge between you and something else. So in order to improve all meta skills at once, which will be a dramatic improvement in your performance in every field, you just need to improve your personality. How do you improve your personality? Again, chaos. You have 5 core skills that I'm gonna call ultimate skills that are even one level deeper than meta skills. Every ultimate skill improves your personality and improves all of your meta skills, which in turn improves all of your any skills. Which are those? There are 3 emotional skills and 2 intellectual skills. How do we know that these are the 5 core skills? At any moment, you can do a mixture of 2 things. You can feel and you can think. Regarding feeling, you have the following options. You can start handling the past better, or acceptance. If you have acceptance, you have the platform to grow. If you don't have acceptance, you have avoidance, which leads nowhere. So acceptance is mandatory. The first ultimate skill is acceptance. In the external world, in the game of life, you can define acceptance as just accepting reality. And in the internal world, the game of self, you can just define acceptance as ultimate self-love. Not something to be earned, but something that just should be there all the time. If you have self-love, then you have internal acceptance, and you'll be able to grow and improve yourself much better, because there will be no barriers within you. After acceptance, what else do you need? The world throws stuff, events in your face, and you need to have some control over your reactions. This is commonly called mindfulness. So something happens to you, you don't just instinctively react, because this will be pretty random. Instead, you observe and you react where your reaction would be the best. This is nothing new, of course, very common in psychology, common in spiritual practices, but still it's a very important emotional skill. Observing gives you the power to understand. If you react, you distort the picture and you lose the power to understand. In the long term, the power to understand is extremely important, as when you become better and better at understanding, you have more and more power and control over everything that happens to you and within you. And at last, every time you react to anything, every time you act, the action has a direction. And the direction can be inwards or outwards. The good direction is always outwards, or what we call the hunter direction, the direction where you go after the good things. The internal direction makes you passive, makes you very inertial, and basically you do nothing. And when you are in the outer direction, you're being driven by love, energy, curiosity, creativity, and when you react inwards, you're driven by fear, being defensive, and this doesn't lead to any good places. So, accept the past and the present moment, acceptance, be mindful, don't be too fast to react, observe, understand, mindfulness, and when you act like a hunter. That's the basic trio of emotional skills. More or less, this is well understood. But what about the intellectual skills? What intellectual skills are at the core of everything we do? In a way, we think all the time, but not all of the thoughts are in our conscious, logical part of the brain. There are a lot of thought processes that are only on an intuitive level, and they also lead to actions, to decisions, but the process that leads to them is invisible. We just see the end result. Intuition, the invisible thinking in our brain, is extremely powerful, much more than logical thinking, because intuition is evolutionary much older and therefore much better developed than the very evolutionary young logical thinking. So intuition should be developed and used at every possible option, and logical thinking is not so useful to man, but it's very useful for humanity, because this is what can be passed over generations, what can be taught to others, and critically, this is what can be accumulated. You cannot accumulate intuition. Intuition will always be just there in your brain, some black box process that you cannot really understand, but logical knowledge can be accumulated for the benefit of mankind, which is something that we have greatly taken advantage of. So, logical thinking has a very good rep because it was good for humanity, but it's not so good for you. Why? Because you're bad at it. Only when it's accumulated and filtered out of all of the errors using the scientific method, only then it becomes being very beneficial. On your personal level, logical thinking is extremely overrated by our current culture. So, if we're gonna lean into intuition, what are the skills that we need in intuition? What are the ultimate skills? There are only two. They fall into just two categories. You have an intuition about structures. This is cause and effect relationships, what is connected to what, how everything evolves over time. All of these branching options, this is the intuition about structures. And in this context, people in your life are also structures. People, the way they think, the way they feel, everything is somehow structured and has causes and effects. So you have an intuition about structures, but the intuition about structures is about things that you can draw as a graph on a piece of paper, and you can see the relations, but you cannot see the context of these relations. And what is the context? The context is how much of the flows in these relations actually drive change, all of the breaking points. So you can go to someone and be annoying, but they may just be fine with it. And then at some point there will be a breaking point and shit will hit the fan. So all of those breaking points in all of the structures are the things that complement the structures. And it's interesting that intuition, the feel about structures, is somehow developed in one place in the brain, and the intuition about quantities, the fear about quantities, is somehow developed in another area of the brain. We don't understand very well how all this happens, but we can observe, even in everyday life, how one person can have an amazing intuition about structures and then thinks that his bag of apples weighs 1 kilo when it actually weighs 2, and another person may have complete lack of understanding of structures and no abstract thought, but can feel how much the apples weigh up to 2-3% margin of error. This is because some people have, depending on their genes and education and upbringing, some people have developed very good feel about structures, and others have developed very good feel about quantities, about flows, about how much of which flows where, and what are the breaking points that turn quantity into a quality change. Is it possible to develop both at once? Yes, if you live a dynamic, fast-paced life, you will encounter enough situations to develop both. And it's absolutely possible, especially if you know that you have a limitations of one of those, that you can develop it. Why do a lot of entrepreneurs fail? Think about an entrepreneur. You start a business, you have some structure, you have some business model. These are all structures. But then you fail at the quantity intuition. You price your product very badly, you overestimate your market, and all of the typical fails of a startup are actually quantity-based. The most common reason for failing startups is really estimating the market, the demand for the product. For a lot of products and services, there is really no demand. This is not a structural failure, this is a quantity failure. You just overestimated the amount of something. It's not that your business model wouldn't work if there was demand. There's just no demand. Same thing with pricing, same thing with your access to customers, same thing with your cost of your advertisement. So it's very typical that we see something as a structural problem, but it's actually a quantity problem. Or the other way around. Sometimes we think that we need more of something, but instead we need a structural solution that just looks completely different. Both intuitions are extremely important for the modern person. Without intuition about structures, you cannot understand how the world works. You do something, expect a positive consequence, but then it's negative. So you have just no idea what you're doing if you don't understand structures. But if you don't understand quantities, you're just as equally fucked, because money is a quantity, value is a quantity. You always struggle in business, even in your day job, because you have no feel about what you're actually giving and receiving in this day job. You may be massively underpaid for the value that you actually give to the company. So quantities are really important, especially in the economic sense, because money is always a quantity. Money is a flow. It doesn't have any structure. It's the flow that connects our structures in business and labor. And also, something that is a quantity is the odds of any event. So if you're very bad at estimating odds, you just will not be able to handle any business, because any business has risk factors and you should estimate them correctly. Not overestimate them, not underestimate them, but just be exact about what the actual risks are. And if you don't have a good feel about quantities, you also don't have a good feel about odds and risk. So all of this will be a huge problem. And you can, of course, learn it, but it may bring some initial fails. So how do usual normal people navigate this? Usually they have one of the fields better developed, either structures or quantities, and they try to fill the gap of intuitive understanding of the other one with logical thinking, which is usually a disaster, because logical thinking is sometimes even worse than just acknowledging that you don't have this intuition and just try to go around the specific problems, play to your strengths. Instead, with logical thinking, you think you know what you're doing, but in fact, you don't. If you just Google mental fallacies and go to Wikipedia, you'll find an enormous list of ways that your logical thinking goes wrong. And most people are completely unaware of most of those and constantly fall into these logical traps of doing the wrong thing. And also, logical thinking usually implies that you have good information to start your logical chain, but you often don't, either because you were too lazy to collect it or because you were or unintentionally misled by others or the world or culture or something. So, not really the best starting point. It's much better to develop intuition. Even if you don't have any intuition about, say, quantities, you can develop it. In our time article, we talk about time and how developing intuition about time, one of the most important quantity flows, can be very beneficial to you. And with simple exercises like trying to guess the time, you can develop your time intuition and thus your quantity intuition. So, now we have a blueprint for improving our skills. We improve our ultimate skills and they improve our meta skills, because meta skills are just a bridge between our ultimate skills and things in life, and thus we improve everywhere. So, what do we need to improve our ultimate skills? We need some force to push us to improve them. And there are two forces in the universe, as I see it. It's not good and evil. These are just human constructs, quite artificial. It's chaos and structure. Chaos pushes things to change, and structure pushes them to remain the same. These are the two opposing forces that result in reality. So let's go one by one through the 5 ultimate skills and see how much they benefit from chaos and how much they benefit from structure. We start with acceptance. Acceptance is very closely related to self-love, because if you have self-love, if you accept yourself, this also helps you accept the world. And then you don't need all these ugly coping mechanisms that you need when you don't have self-love. And without that distortion, you see the world as it is, you see yourselves as the beautiful human being that you are, and everything is great. So where does acceptance come from? It comes from self-love. But where does self-love come from? It should already be there, but there are barriers that can get in the way. And the biggest barrier to self-love is to think that you deserve it. If you think that self-love has anything to do with deserving, this means that in the moment that you don't feel you deserve self-love, you don't feel self-love, which means that you have self-love only some of the time and not strong enough, because it's not this flow that you should be with you all the time. A lot of kids are brought up with the idea that they should deserve everything. Make your bed and I'll give you a jelly bean. A lot of transactional love, so to speak, which may be good for setting up, showing how life works, but a very bad example for self-love, because self-love should not be deserved. It should be unconditional, just like real love. And when you have this from a very young age, you think that everything good in life should be deserved, and self-love, obviously a good thing, should also be deserved. And the moments that you are down, that you're feeling like you let yourself down, you don't feel you deserve self-love. But that's also when you most need it. So this is how things go bad. And what can really help in this regard? It's not structure. Structure is the deserving. It's the having rules, of having proportionality. It's chaos that can help, because chaos can help you that life is full of undeserved stuff, both good and bad. But here the good one is important, because every example that life gives you that there are things that are good and completely undeserved really brings you closer to self-love. So, for acceptance, we need chaos. Mindfulness is a very flow state. It's a state where you just let go, observe. It doesn't have any structure to it. So, mindfulness is very clearly benefited by chaos, by things to observe, and it's not in any way related to structure. Actually, mindfulness is the process of letting go of structures, just letting things be, not impose any rules, not impose anything at all on the flow of experience. So, mindfulness is also benefited by chaos. The good direction, the outwards direction, the hunter mode. So hunter mode, in theory, is something that is very benefited by chaos, because a lot of things happen to you, you become active, dynamic. So going into hunter mode is a chaotic process, and it often happens this way in life. Life gives you chaos and you go into hunter mode to make something out of it. But staying in hunter mode can sometimes feel a bit structured, because you're trying to make the most of your time and you set up, let's say, productivity criteria in your brain and try to do a lot. And there's a lot of problem solving connected to the view of hunter mode. You solve this and you solve that. And all of this problem solving, there are a lot of structures, because this is the world we live in. So hunter mode is kind of in the middle. You need chaos, but it contains a lot of structures when you solve problems. So it is, from all of the 5 ultimate skills, it's the one that is more related to structure. So we'll call this even. For hunter mode, you need chaos and good structures so you can solve the right problems. So what about the intellectual ultimate skills, the 2 types of intuition? Intuition about structures is the feeling how structures form, evolve, and interact. And very paradoxically, this feeling comes from chaos. We explored how when you try to learn, which is literally building a structure somewhere in your brain, even if it's intuitive, it's still a structure. Trying to learn when you don't have the structure and you build it yourself by connecting the dots is more effective, more long-term, especially in terms of building intuition, than when you have it ready. We had these examples with school and the chaotic and systematized learning to show how, in order to create the best structure within you, the best intuition about structures, you actually need chaos. You need chaotic learning, you need time, and that's the way to do it. So in order to create a feel about structures, you just need to interact with tons of random structures and try to understand them. That's all there is to it. You just need chaos. You just need to encounter very different types of structures, and your brain will start looking for the commonalities and building its own intuitive theory of structures somewhere in your brain that you may not be able to actually understand how it's built, but it gives you solutions and they're good. In I Grow Younger, we often talk about Alexander Grothendieck, genius mathematician, dubbed the Einstein of mathematics. So Grothendieck had probably the best intuition about structures in the history of mankind. He was someone who looked at the work of thousands of mathematicians before him, who built a structure that seems so complicated and so close to matching reality, to matching the actual structure of mathematics. And Grothendieck was like, this doesn't feel right. Why don't I build one myself that will serve our abstract mathematical challenges better? And so he built parallel structures, which is something that you can do if you have just an amazing intuition about structures, because where do you even start? I have a friend, a very high-level mathematician, who is working in the same field of mathematics as Grothendieck, algebraic geometry. And he told me that the levels of of abstraction and deep understanding that Grothendieck had were absolutely unmatched. That he made elements, structures that you cannot even imagine. They're so abstract, but when you start building things from them, magic happens and everything works, and you're able to prove things that you couldn't prove with your theory. So this is something that you can really think about when concerning your intuition. It's the same with your intuition. You don't know the building blocks, but in the end, magic happens. Your brain is extremely capable in this regard, and the fact that you don't understand how it happens does not diminish the power of this approach. If you're not Grothendieck and you have an average person intuition about structures, you need to build it because it's important. And you build it from chaos, because the structures that the world will give you, just like the structures that the best mathematicians in the world gave Grothendieck, they are not perfect. And also, you will not connect the dots if you just copy them into your brain. You can do better both by connecting the dots yourself, so it can be deeper knowledge, and by trying to invent good structures of your own. If you think everything is already invented, you're extremely wrong. Small warning about inventing your own structures and burying yourself in chaos. It's a bit tiring. This is pushing the brain to your intellectual limits. And if you're someone who does this all day long for a long time, remember that the line between being a genius and going crazy is a very thin one. So don't over push yourself. There is a limit. Of course, most people are extremely far away from the danger zone, but still, just to have this warning. People need structure in their lives. If you surround yourself with only chaos, it's gonna be very exhausting for your brain. Very productive, but very exhausting. So just take it easy. Take it step by step by upping the level of chaos you introduce to your brain. Your brain can definitely handle it if you do it gradually, but if you decide all of a sudden that you're gonna learn nuclear physics tomorrow by yourself, then it's gonna be tough and you may be overwhelmed and quit, which is not the point. So, structures need chaos. What about quantities? What about the other intellectual ultimate skill? Well, where do we see the people with the best intuition about quantities? Of course, in the stock market. These are people like Warren Buffett, who did a lot of trading, and they have an amazing feel about the flows of money, value, trust, and other quantitative factors in our very complicated economy. So, Warren Buffett is now 93. He bought his first stock when he was 11 years old. He has been trading stocks for 82 years. Imagine how much the economy has changed in 82 years and how much chaos Warren Buffett has seen. How much totally unexplainable ups and downs in the market crashes, boom and bust cycles, all of these things that economists try to understand but cannot really understand because economy is not an exact science, because the decisions are made from people. People are emotional, irrational, including even stock traders and investors. So it's just impossible to understand everything that's going on. But if you're someone as good as Warren Buffett, you can feel it intuitively. And that's why he has been so successful. It's the intuition. And this intuition didn't come from rules or principles, because in the stock market there aren't any, or if there are some general ones, everyone knows them. And in order to be better, you need to have a better feel. You cannot out-knowledge the stock market. You can only out-feel it. So this is where we can see how much intuition about quantities, how good it is. And given that we can now give a very advanced AI and just humongous amount of data, and we can give it all the computing power to analyze this data with all of the best algorithms. And of course, it will also be able to take and implement decisions faster than humans. So it will be able to jump on good opportunities faster. And still, even still, best possible automated trader in the world will not be as good as Warren Buffett. Why? Because Buffett has the feel. Because still human intuition is more powerful than even a supercomputer. About feel. About structures, it's getting different. The protein folding problem for another really structural problems, AI is getting better than humans. But the feel about quantities, no model can do this as good as the human brain. So where does this feel for quantities come from? Chaos. When you have seen millions of data points, your brain just puts it all on invisible maps and know where the next one should be. Of course, it can be wrong, but if it's better than the best supercomputer in the world and the best current AI, we definitely should develop and trust it. So, what's the final score between chaos and structure? Chaos beats structure 4.5 to 0.5, with only the direction, the hunter-sheep spectrum being kind of in the middle. In everything else, it turns out that chaos is what brings the real progress in the ultimate skills, which means that you just need chaos in your life. Not too much, of course, don't overdo it. You also need stability, otherwise you mentally start to freak out and all kinds of coping mechanisms start to emerge. If you don't have any structure in your life, you may fall into addiction cycles because this is a bad structure, but you so desperately need one that you implement a bad one instead of just having nothing. So you need structure in your life. You need stability in a way. You need a place to live. It's very nice to have a family, to have someone to care for. But in terms of work opportunities, business, entrepreneurship, career, development, about being creative, you need chaos. Because chaos is what will make your ultimate skills grow, your meta skills grow, and many of your other skills grow. Because structure can only preserve. Creation comes from chaos, as confirmed by many of the best artists in the world in all fields of art. Creation comes from chaos. And what is the value of preserving in the current world in a developed country? You live in a system where preserving is outsourced to the government, police, military, scientists, engineers, doctors, first responders. Preserving is collectively managed by humanity now. So what is your responsibility as a person? It's doing chaos and creating. Creating is what is rewarded in our economy. If you're in the preserving cycle, you just work a nasty low-wage job with very limited freedom and opportunity to grow. But if you can be a creator, if you can invent, if you can be an entrepreneur, that's where you get rewarded. And not that every time it will work, but if you do it again and again, you will eventually develop your ultimate skills and meta skills, and it will start working. Chaos participates in the hunter-sheep dynamic, but it's also a main actor in your financial dynamic. As in many other things, you can be in two cycles, a virtuous cycle and a vicious cycle. A virtuous cycle about good chaos, about chaos that you can somehow implement in your life while keeping it more or less under control in general. So what we'll call organized chaos, the one that you actively seek, not just unexpected things that life throws in your face. Organized chaos develops the ultimate skills. And when you develop the ultimate skills, you get personal growth and earn more money. More money means more freedom in the game of life. And with more freedom, you get all of those small problems in life more easily fixed, and you have more time. And with freedom, you can always choose to have more chaos in your life. You can always choose to move to a more chaotic place. Let's say you were born somewhere in a very small town with very little opportunities to grow, but you can always move to a very chaotic place like New York. And in New York, you have much more opportunities to grow. You have much more opportunities for chaos, for meeting random people, which can give you inspiration. And then we have more chaos, more ultimate skills, more money, more freedom. And if you lost the chaos on the way on this journey, freedom gives you the freedom to always have more chaos. When we look at the vicious cycle, the reverse one, no chaos means less ultimate skills growth and poor meta skills, and then no money. Because to earn money in almost everything, you need to know about how to sell a product, a service, or even yourself if you're entering some partnerships. So someone else can sell your products or services. You need to be able to sell yourself, your ideas. So sales is an extremely important central meta skill. But if you don't have chaos, you don't develop the ultimate skills, you won't have conviction. And without conviction, you won't have any sales skills, no matter how many books you read on the topic. Just, it's all about conviction. Sales, a very large part of it. So then you earn less money, and when you earn less money, you lack freedom. And when you lack freedom, very annoying small problems creep in your life, like your car breaks down, and for sometimes you don't have a car, or you need to earn extra money to fix your car, and all of this takes your time and focus, and in the end you lack good controlled creative chaos because you're fixing your car. And this is what happens to millions of people every day, this vicious cycle of like they have chaos in their life, but not it's the good kind of chaos, the creative chaos. They just have unpredictable bad structures, like their car breaks down, because this is not really chaos, because if you buy an old car, I can very reliably predict that it will break down. So it's just a structure, it's just the moment in time that it will happen is unknown, but it is definitely sure that it will happen at some point. So we have this trends up and down, and it's very sad because poor people may get caught into a very bad vicious cycle where just the positive organized chaos and creativity are literally just vacuumed out of their life because they are dealing with all the bad structures. And I have observed this actually happen with a person I knew, and it was very, very sad to watch how he was battling all of these obstacles every day just because they didn't have any money, any savings, and couldn't even creatively figure their way out because their creativity was like sucked out by all of the problems. Like in very poor countries, people are used to this lifestyle and they are inherently very creative. But if in a more developed country where you were raised in a normal family, not in total scarcity, and you had a normal childhood, and then life hits you with this downward spiral, this is extremely hard for people to handle. A typical example is that you cannot afford to change your low wage, low growth, high stress job because you need it, because you don't know if you'll find another one, and you don't have the buffer, the financial buffer to be without a job even for 1 month, because you need to pay rent and expenses. And this is how this structure can really invade your life and become dominant, and it's very hard to actually gather the good chaos to kick it out and make your life dynamic again. Most people, even with small starting capital, just as long as they are not caught into this vicious cycle, can use chaos in their life and choosing an easy industry like something digital to start being an entrepreneur, at least a freelancer, and grow and create the good chaos in their life, and which will also be their training ground to hone their ultimate skills and meta skills. It's not a silver bullet. No one will become wealthy overnight, but in 3 to 5 years it's doable for almost every person with a good understanding of English and digital literacy. It's absolutely possible to make money in different ways online in order to escape the structure trap. The main problem is when you just don't choose the right path, choose a bad industry, in which we have talked in other videos. The ultimate skills, they don't just help you succeed, they help you to be happier. So it's very important that you develop them. Structure is what improves mankind, and chaos is what improves you. In your personal life, structure has its place in the form of good habits, but this is all of the power that you should give it. Because apart from good habits, everything else in your personal life that is structured may actually impede your growth or even bring you down instead of actually helping you. Growth comes from chaos. So, where do you find the chaos? I have many chaotic experiences, but I will not tell you, because what you need is to discover your own chaos, your own creativity, your own path. This is not something that you should read from somewhere. You should always experiment. Chaos is about experimenting, about diving into the unknown, and this is your own journey. So you can copy my journey if you want to earn money, but in order to bring good, healthy chaos into your life, you need to create your own. You just need to start. And a good start is trying to start some business or becoming a freelancer, trying different things. That's a good start for chaos in your work life. A good start for your everyday life is to spend more time in nature, hike, and do chaotic behaviors, dance, do everything that doesn't have a lot of structure to it. These are the things that will help your mind get better accustomed to chaos. I hope this helps you grow. For more videos like this, like, subscribe, comment, tell us in the comments how chaos helped in your life so far, and I'll see you in the next one.
How? Naturally, we'll become the managed to avoid women. So,
The guy. Yeah, the valve.